Hi, this is Miss Howell, and I'm here to talk to you today about the digestive system, which is Module 13 in your book. We're going to get this entire module done in 1 week and fly through it as fast as I can. I've got 15 minutes, so here we go. Look for red words to fill in your guided notes. So you've probably heard the saying, you are what you eat. Well, more than that, you're what you eat, digest, and absorb. So in this module, we're going to learn about how your body obtains nutrients from the food you eat. We're going to learn about each item on a dinner plate, how it's digested in different locations throughout your GI tract, and we're going to learn about the different functions of the various accessory organs as well. A lot of this we're going to cover in class, and you'll need to cover within your textbook because there's so much to this chapter, but I wanted to do it all in 1 week to save time. So first I want you to pause the tape and see if you can't label this first diagram on your own, just to see where you are as we get started. In reality, there's a lot more detail than what you found in those 5 little organs listed. So let's see if you can name any of the other organs in the next diagram. So hit pause and see how many you know in this one. So in addition to naming these organs, when you're finished with this module, you're going to be able to explain the function of every organ, and you'll be able to tell where along the way every item on your dinner plate can be digested and absorbed. So let's begin with the letters A, B, and C of the diagram. Digestion begins within the mouth. You probably didn't think about digestion in your mouth, but that is true. The purpose of the teeth within your mouth is to bite, cut, tear, grind, and crush your food. Teeth are your weapons of mastication. Mastication just means the act of chewing. You are an omnivore. That means you eat meat and vegetables. And you have various types of teeth because of it. Incisors are used for cutting. These are the front teeth, and they allow you to bite into an apple with ease. Canines, the pointy teeth in the corners, are used to tear food. Did you know that alligator teeth are all canines? Did you also know that alligators don't chew? They use their canine teeth to grab on and hold their meal as they shake their prey back and forth, tearing it into little chunks so that they can swallow those chunks whole. But unlike alligators, we've got premolars and molars, and those allow us to do some crushing and grinding of our food. Letter I in the diagram points to salivary glands within your mouth. The salivary glands secrete about 1 liter of saliva every day, most of the time while you're eating. Saliva contains mostly water, but there's also mucus to help make your food slippery so it can slide through easier. You also have amylase, lysozyme, and antibodies within your saliva. Chewing and the water of your saliva accomplishes the mechanical digestion process within the mouth. That's just breaking down the size of the food you've eaten into smaller pieces. The digestive enzymes are required throughout your digestive tract to accomplish the chemical digestion, and that's what creates molecular change, allowing nutrient molecules to be absorbed into the cells. Amylase is the first of these enzymes. Amylase in the mouth breaks down long-chain carbohydrates like starch into small sugary disaccharides. Once the mouth is cut, crushed, and mixed up your food with some saliva, your tongue then forms it into a soft lump called a bolus. That's preparing it for deglutition. Deglutition is a big fancy word that means the act of swallowing. When you swallow, the soft palate in the back of your throat rises to close off your nasal cavity. That's just to prevent food from rising up into your nose. At the same time, the epiglottis seals off the larynx so that food stays out of your trachea and moves into your lungs, won't move into your lungs. The bolus can then safely travel through your pharynx, which is your throat, into the esophagus, and the esophagus takes it on its way to the stomach. Peristaltic waves push this food bolus down your esophagus and into the stomach. So from your throat is a tube that has muscles that squeeze the food bolus down into your stomach. That tube is the esophagus. Peristalsis is the process of contraction and relaxation of these circular smooth muscles around the esophageal tube that pushes the food all the way down your alimentary canal. As the food bolus reaches the very bottom or the end of the esophagus, there's a sphincter called the cardiac sphincter that's stimulated when you press down on it with food, and then the food is able to pass through to the stomach. So now we're going to move into the stomach. That's labeled D in the diagram. Food is now passed below your diaphragm. The diaphragm is a thin muscle layer. Let me point that out. It's right here under your rib cage that separates your thoracic cavity that's the upper part of your body, from your abdominal cavity. This thin muscle is going to be involved in breathing, and we're going to talk about that next week. The stomach is an organ that can stretch a lot when it's full, and that's because of rugae. Rugae are accordion-like folds, some people call them rugae, on the inner surface of the stomach. They're like pleats and folds, and they allow the stomach to expand, and it also lets the stomach churn the food as it mixes it with acid and enzymes to aid in the breakdown of proteins. Sphincters at the top and the bottom maintain the contents of the stomach for a period of time to allow for mechanical and chemical digestion to take place. The acid is hydrochloric acid. The pH is 1 to 2. This can kill lots of different bacteria that might be in your food. This acid also works to trigger the release of a chemical called pepsin, which is an enzyme that breaks down protein into much smaller amino acid chains called peptides. These little mini proteins are still not small enough to be absorbed, so further digestion will take place later. To prevent all the strong acid from digesting the stomach itself, the lining is continually secreting an enormous amount of mucus to protect it. The result of all the mixing and the continual churning of the food bolus in your stomach has now changed it into a liquid which is called chyme. The stomach empties real slowly by peristaltic waves, pushing this liquid chyme in spurts through the lower pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. It's within the small intestine, letter E in the diagram, that most of digestion and absorption of nutrients takes place. The small intestine of the average adult is about 20 feet long, and this 20 feet tube is divided into 3 regions. The first region that's attached directly to the stomach is called the duodenum. The next part is the jejunum, and then the distal or final region is called the ileum. The mucosal surface, that's the inner lining of the small intestine. If you were to look at a garden hose and look inside the surface inside, that's the mucosal surface. There are tiny projections that stick out everywhere. Those are called villi. And these projections each have projections on their surface, and those are called microvilli. The purpose of the projections on top of the projections is simply to increase the surface area, and that aids in absorption. It's fascinating that God created us with this massively large absorption layer in such a tiny little compact space. If He hadn't created villi and microvilli, our intestines would need to be 2¼ miles long in order to have enough time to absorb all the micronutrients that we need. But before those nutrients can be absorbed, we've got to digest these food particles all the way down to their smallest form. So one of the first things the small intestine does is decrease the acidity of the chyme. So there's some chemicals involved that have to stop the production of gastric acid as soon as chyme enters the small intestine. Also, if fat is present in your meal, bile will be released from the gallbladder when the small intestine senses the presence of fat ready for digestion. So without the presence of fat, no need for bile. I need you to make note also that enzymes, the names of enzymes, end with the suffix ase, and the root word usually signifies what molecules are being acted upon. So think of them that way when you read this list. The major digestive enzymes in the intestinal juice are maltase, sucrase, lactase, peptidase, and enterokinase. So all of those end in ase, so we know right away that they're enzymes. And for instance, look at sucrase. So sucrase is an enzyme that breaks down sucrose, which is a sugar. So it takes a sucrose disaccharide and splits it into 2 glucose molecules, and you can absorb the glucose. Now enterokinase is different. So enterokinase, the enzyme itself does not break down anything, but enterokinase is used to activate another chemical called trypsinogen, and it changes that into trypsin. And then the trypsin is able to break down the protein, those little mini proteins that are left over after the stomach. They're finished up by the trypsin within the small intestine. Peristaltic waves, much like the esophageal waves, churn and mix and propel chyme along the small intestine, and they allow chemical agents to come into contact with all the nutrient molecules, and that introduces the micronutrients to the microvilli, those little bitty projections, which are filled on the inside of the microvilli with capillaries, allowing the nutrients to be absorbed as things push forward on their way to the large intestine. Note here that the fatty acid molecules that come up after the fats are digested do not get directly absorbed into capillaries within the microvilli. Instead, fatty acids are absorbed into something called a lacteal, the lacteals of the lymph system. These lymph vessels then dump fatty acids into the blood circulatory system later as the lymph is dumped back in. So now we move to the large intestine, which is letters F and G in the diagram. The large intestine is separated from the small intestine by a sphincter, another tight muscle, that limits the amount of chyme that leaves the small intestine at a time. The large intestine gets its name large, not because the length is greater, but because the diameter is greater. It's bigger around. The small intestine has a smaller diameter. The tube is narrow. The large intestine's tube is larger. It's also divided into 3 sections. The cecum is the beginning of the large intestine. That's where the appendix is located. So the small intestine ends with the ileum, and the large intestine begins with the cecum. So there's the ileal-cecal connection there. Most of the large intestine is the colon, and colon is where water is absorbed. That's the primary function of the colon. And then the rectum is the vault at the very, very end, and that vault, or the rectum, holds your feces until you're ready for defecation. You've got various strains of bacteria living symbiotically within the large intestine. I know you've heard of E. coli, and some people think that's a bad thing, but E. coli is just one of many different types of bacteria that are necessary for your survival. Vitamin K is necessary for blood clotting, and several other B vitamins that you need are produced as these intestinal bacteria feed on chyme and help form our feces. It's estimated that there are about 100 trillion bacteria in our gut, and that the bacteria that live within us weigh themselves about 3 pounds. All right, look back at your diagram, and now we're at letter J. Letter J at the bottom of the diagram is the anus. This is the opening at the very, very end of the alimentary canal, and this is what allows for defecation, which is the removal of waste from our system. At that point, you actually have 2 sphincters, the internal and external anal sphincters, to allow you to be able to willfully control when the body releases these products. All the other sphincters within your system, they're triggered by the presence of something pressing on them. The food moves along, presses on the sphincter, and it moves through. But you have willful control over especially that external anal sphincter. So now we've moved from plate to the toilet. And at this point, all we've really talked about is the alimentary canal itself. That's the tube from mouth to anus. We've discussed a little bit about the macronutrients, where those have been broken down along the way and how enzymes are involved in that. But we didn't take time to talk about the accessory organs that are so important to the digestion process, like the pancreas and the gallbladder and the liver. So these organs, which are letters I through L in the diagram, produce enzymes and other chemicals that you need for chemical digestion. So you're going to have to spend time in the textbook on those last few pages learning about these, and then we'll spend a little time in class talking about them and their roles in digestion. And the last thing I'd have you do on this guided notes page is to go back and look at this picture again. I've placed it again at the end. I want you to label the organs of the digestive system. Remember, letters A through H are all those of the alimentary canal, and then I through L are the accessory organs. And then we also need to go back and be able to discuss where the following macromolecules are digested. Get that done and bring it to class. We'll see you then.